Welcome back. It's a pleasure to introduce you to our third speaker, who has already participated in one of our conferences. Will Ord specializes in helping schools to create great learners, and his training courses explore key areas such as metacognition, engagement, memory, reflection, thinking and communication skills, active learning, mindfulness, and well-being. Today, we will talk about the power of questioning. If you would like to ask any questions at the end of the presentation, please send us a WhatsApp. You will see the icon there at the bottom of the screen, and we will be very happy to share those questions with Will. Over to you, Will. Good morning.
Good morning, and what a pleasure it is to be back with the ESARC conference. It was such a pleasure in 2019. I was just amazed at the professionalism and the warmth and the good character of all the colleagues there. And it also left me feeling I must learn to dance. So that is on my list for 2022. Silvana, thank you so much for inviting me, and extended thanks to the team that's put this together. It's wonderful to bring us all together here. Well, I'm about to share some slides. The focus, as Silvana's mentioned, for this half-hour session, which is not long, is on the power of questioning. And of course, as teachers, we use questioning as a daily thing in the classroom. My core aim here is to help us all extend and deepen our ability with using questioning, particularly pupils asking questions in the classroom. So I'm going to start with a few slides and the reasons why I'm making this the focus for this half hour. So let's just take a look at some of the slides here. So why bother with questioning? Well, I'm going to offer 4 reasons of many as to why I think it's worth focusing on this area in particular. The first is about curiosity, and curiosity is, of course, quite a curious thing in itself. So just pause for a moment and consider, would you call curiosity either a thought, an emotion, or a sensation in your body? If you could only pick one of those 3, would you say curiosity is an emotion, a thought, or a sensation? And if you're anything like me, when you start to investigate it, it becomes quite a curious thing in itself. And yet we all know as teachers that curiosity is probably the most powerful motivator in the classroom for motivating children to learn. It's a bit like a fuel, like petrol for a car. I don't think there's any real enjoyable learning without curiosity. And yet curiosity, I think, is not enough in itself, of course. It's like the fuel, it's the petrol. But of course, if we want to take a learning journey in the car, of course we need petrol, we need that curiosity. But equally, we need to find a path to follow. Where's that car going to go? And that, I think, is where questioning comes in. It's a bit like giving ourselves a direction in the sat-nav. So I've got this feeling, a sense of mystery, a sense of interest. Imagine, for example, you're walking in nature and you come across an extraordinary little creature that you've never seen before, not even in books. And you're just suddenly filled with this sense of wonder and mystery and interest. But in order to draw some learning, some discovery out of that feeling of interest, we need a path to follow. And that, for me, is when you put that feeling into words and you form a question. So my first reason for looking at the power of questioning is to give curiosity a path to follow. That is something to do with a feeling. Otherwise, the curiosity is just a sensation or a feeling that goes nowhere. We need to find a path forward. So that's the first key reason, tapping into children's motivation. Second reason is to help children think independently. which of course must be a goal of anything that we can consider as real education. We want them to leave school able to think for themselves, not relying on the teacher all the time to guide their next step. So here I'm thinking particularly of kind of metacognitive questions, and there is a resource that you can download from the ESARP website to give you a list of at least 20 metacognitive questions you might practice with in the classroom. In particular, we're thinking of things like critical thinking and self-questioning. So it's not the teacher doing all the questioning, it's the pupils getting into that habit of questioning things for themselves. And we know, of course, from John Hattie's visible learning and the research into things that make a difference to pupil achievement, that questioning has got a 0.64 effect size. That is, we know from the research that good questioning and self-questioning in the classroom can have a very significant impact on the achievement of young people. So there's the second reason, to help children think independently, not relying on the teacher. The third reason, and I think this is going to be ever more important in the 21st century, is the power of questioning and its role in creating healthier communities. Can you imagine a community that couldn't question how they were going to achieve things together, what their priorities were, how to resolve differences, how to create new pathways, how to communicate well with each other? I think a healthy community is a community that has got that as a habit, that power of questioning. And finally, fourth reason, the power of questioning to help teachers teach even better. And again, just imagine teaching a class where you have no pupil questioning power in the classroom, and contrast that with a classroom that is full of great questioners. That's going to be far more energized and innovative and exciting for the teacher to know what the children are curious about, to use that motivation, and if you like, to surf on that wave. So I think there's great reasons just for the enjoyment of our own job to build questioning in our pupils. And there are four reasons. There are others, of course. We could put it another way, actually, a final argument. There's the Deloitte survey of millennials. It's about 50,000 people who are interviewed. And they were asked, well, what are the most important skills for the century ahead? And of course, millennials, they're about 35 to 40 years old or so now. And they compiled a list of what that age group thought was most important. And here's the top 15 of that survey. This is the 2019 Deloitte Millennial Survey. Now, there's a good number of things there. Just look, let's say, at the left-hand column for a second. So interpersonal skills, confidence and motivation, strong ethics and integrity, critical thinking, innovation and creativity, and so on. In my view, all of those require great questioning to come alive, to be really thought through. How on earth could we judge right and wrong? How on earth could we agree and disagree well with each other and discover different opinions without the power of questioning? So I think that questioning is key, of course, to learning, to unleashing curiosity, but also for the century ahead, as an underpinning skill that connects with so many other skills that we want to develop. So there are just a few and very brief arguments for questioning as worthy of focus. So let's have a look at this more practically, because one of the key things I'd love you to take from today is some actual experiments that you can try in the classroom. That's a really key part. Will today lead to some change? So pupil questioning skills in particular, not just teachers' questioning skills. It's often said as a criticism, really, of education systems around the world that education can be answer rich and question poor. And Understandably, to some degree, because of course tests and exams require pupils to answer things. They're not asked to create their own questions in our testing and exam and grade systems. So as children go through school, perhaps there's less and less focus on their ability to question and more focus on their ability to answer. And I'm arguing here for that oxygen, for that space to be kept, for them to be questioners as well as answerers. And I think one of the key things to communicate to children and get them to play with is two elements of questioning. One is that there are different types of question and that there are different levels of question. So let me make this very practical and applied. What do we mean by types of question, first of all? Well, there's a marvelous tool from a chap called Phil Cam, and it's called the question quadrant. So we'll just start with the quadrant itself. We've got two axes, the X and Y axis. And on the left there, you can see that questions can be closed, i.e. that they might have only one specific answer. And at the other end of that scale, that they can be very open, that they might be a question that invite lots of possible answers. So that's one spectrum where we might judge our questions. And then we've got specific at the top of the y-axis there. We've got specific answers, which are particular to a context, to a particular circumstance. And then towards the other end of the y-axis there, we've got the general questions. That is, these questions could be asked in lots and lots of different kinds of contexts. So how can we use this idea in the classroom? Well, let's imagine you've read a book together. Let's say we've read the story of Goldilocks. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now, it's not a problem if you don't know the story itself, but it's a story of a girl. She breaks into a house, she eats soup and sleeps in the beds with three bears that live there. Now, as a first step, we could say that there are comprehension type questions. That is, we've read the story of Goldilocks, and a question the pupils might ask was, well, what was Goldilocks looking for? And we find the answer to that question by understanding or comprehending the text. So the answer is in the book. And very often, the kinds of questions that children answer in the classroom are of that sort because they're easy to mark and comprehension is an important skill. So it's very understandable. So that's one area of questions, and I think those are very, perhaps if not the most common question in schools. Now, there are other types of question, what we might call factual questions. So let's say they've read the story of Goldilocks and they've asked, well, how do you make soup? Now, however many times I read the story, I can't find the answer to that in the book. So I've got to leave the context and ask an expert or look on the web or do some research or ask a chef. So they're still closed questions. They've got definite answers and they're factual and they're easy to mark. So that's another type of question. It's where we have to leave the text and look elsewhere for the answer. And then we've got a kind of a third option, a third type of question. That is where they have to use their imagination, what we might call speculative questions. So they're just wondering about things. They've read the story of Goldilocks and one of the pupils asked, well, what did the daddy bear do for a job? Now, again, the answer's not in the book itself, but I won't be able to find out on the internet either. There's no factual one answer out there. It's just that we've got to take a guess. We've got to speculate. We've got to wonder. So it's a wondering kind of question, but we might have a guess. And there, though, the thinking stops. There's not much we can do with that guess. So let's go into the fourth area. And these are the questions that I think are perhaps least common in schools and yet hold the key to the most thinking for the pupils to do. And these are kind of inquiry type questions. That is, they really need thinking about. So they've read the story of Goldilocks and they're asking questions like, well, when might it be good to steal something? So it's an open question. There are lots of possible answers, but it's also generalized. It's not about Goldilocks specifically. We might think of that in lots of different contexts. And my argument here is that these kinds of questions are the ones that invite great discussion and dialogue, adventures in learning together. So there's my first suggestion. And how might you use this in the classroom then? Well, it might be that you're reading a book or you've studied some topic, and you might create a pile of questions on pieces of card and just get the children to place the questions in whichever quadrant they think that question belongs in. So they've covered a topic and they're going to place the comprehension questions in the comprehension area. And then they might look at a question and think, oh, well, I think that's an inquiry question. That's asking me to think about that a lot. So I'm going to put that in that quadrant. So we're getting them to categorize types of question. You could extend that practically by getting them to create their own questions for each of the quadrants. So let's say they've read a book. Could they come up with one question, perhaps in groups, where they have to create the 4 different types of question? So we're getting them to recognize types of question as a fundamental part of the power of questioning. So that's a little bit about types of question. There's also levels of question. And let me just give you another little very simple activity that can kind of introduce this idea. First of all, let's say you have your class and you could get them just to go and meet someone else, and they're just going to ask each other as an initial question, how old are you? And right from the start, that's a very simple question. You might say, well, I'm 12 years old and 10 months. But there's a one factual answer. And they'll do that quite quickly. Maybe they could ask 5 people that and they get quick answers. But let's take that to a slightly more challenging level. And then you have a second round of questions where they meet each other. And I'm going to ask this: when are you old? Now that question is demanding a little bit more thinking. Well, maybe I think I'm old when I'm 80, or when I can't walk anymore, or when my hair turns grey. So they might say, I've got to be this age, and it's taking a little bit more thinking. It's not an obvious factual answer. Now let's take it down one more level. What does it mean to be old? So they're having to think about the concept of being old and describe what that concept means to them. And that demands a more sophisticated, more careful, more imaginative and creative way of thinking. So we've got 3 levels of questions here, and we could just simply ask them to think which one was the hardest of those questions and why do you think it was harder? So we're getting them to recognize types of questions and levels of questions. Now, what I'd like to do next is share with you a really key technique for getting them to ask those deeper inquiry questions for themselves. Let's say you give them a stimulus. That is anything that's going to get them thinking. It might be a poem or an artifact. It might be a picture. It might be a little bit of drama. It might be something they watch on YouTube together. It's anything that gets them thinking. In this case, let's just say it's this. We're going to give them a picture of some ducklings. Now, I could just say to them, what questions have you got? And I did this with a group of about 40 children. They were aged roughly about 7 years old. It's very, very mixed ability. And I got them into groups and say, hey, just tell me what questions you've got about this picture. And let me give you their answers. And these are lower level questions. So the first group said, oh, he's been left behind. Well, immediately we might say, well, that's not even a question. So there's a challenge there. I've got to help them understand what is the question, and could you convert that into a question like, well, why is he being left behind, perhaps? Another group said maybe they haven't seen the little one. And again, we've got a problem there. That's not even a question. It's just an observation. But the rest were questions. Why are the black ducks so selfish? Should the black ducks be selfish? Can the black ducks help the yellow one? Are they all friends? Did the black ducks push that one off? Now, those are all lovely questions, and we could certainly discuss them. But they're limited to the picture. So they're kind of literal. They're tied down to the specific context of that picture of the ducklings. Now, I'm looking for that general element to the questions. I want higher order abstract questions that aren't about a particular picture. I want them to think of big open questions that anybody could answer, even if they didn't see the photo. So how can I scaffold the process to get them from limited specific questions to the more abstract, higher order, broader, deeper questions that demand more thinking? Well, here's a way of scaffolding the process, and I'd love you to just give this a go after today sometime. Think of a stimulus that you'd like to use, anything that you think you would get them thinking, and then try this. Rather than going to that and just saying, hey, what questions have you got? We're going to break the process down. I'm not going to ask them, what questions have you got? My first step here is to ask them, what do you think's going on there? So I'm going to get them to speculate and hypothesize and wonder. They've got to express a story of what they think's going on there. So they might discuss it in groups, and then I'm going to get them to tell me the story of what they think's going on. So we're not talking about questioning at this point. I'm just going to get them to describe the situation. Let's say one group says, well, we think the little yellow duck is being bullied by the black ducks. And she's being bullied because she's different to the others. Now, as I'm listening to the story, what I'm going to do is some concept spotting. And it's the concepts where the thinking is going to happen. So a concept from that story I've heard is bullying. We have a concept, which a concept is a bag of ideas that's connected. So I hear, oh, they're being bullied. So, okay, and I might write down the word bullied or bullying on the board. And I hear the word different. And I said, oh, well, that's a concept. There's a concept of being different. So I write the word different down on the board. So I go to various stories in the group, and I'm going to collect concepts. Now, once I've collected the concepts, then and only then do I say to them, right, you can ask any question you want, but here's the rule. You need to include at least one word from our list of concepts that our stories have held. So let me show you that as a staged process. We start with a stimulus and we don't ask for questions. We're going to break questioning down into a process. I ask for stories. They're bullying the yellow duck because she's different and lonely. Okay, we've got three concepts there: bullying, different and lonely. And then I collect more concepts from other groups. And then I say to them, you can make any question you want, so long as you use at least one of the concepts. You can have more if you want. So you could use two concepts if you want. Then they create the questions. And there's some examples of the kinds of questions that the group could come up with. So is bullying always bad? When is it okay to be different? Are people lonely because they're different? Do people bully because they're lonely? Now, these questions have got nothing to do with the ducklings. That is, the question has gone general and abstract. And when you do that, I think you give much more space to creative and critical thinking. And this will empower them to ask questions with any topic you cover for the rest of their school life. So I'm selecting this particular technique because I think it's really powerful in the classroom. Now, I'm aware that time is flying, and I want to leave a couple of moments for questioning with Silvana, if there are any questions, but I would just like to mention one other thing that you might do as a staff. And I've used this many times with schools, and it can lead to a really, really powerful and practical kind of shift for the school. There's a number of things we could cover here, but I'm just going to end with this. I would invite all of my staff to ask this question and answer it. What is the most important question for your school at this time? And of course, we've had an extraordinary last 18 months or so. And if each staff member creates an answer to that, that is, you create a question, what is the most important question for your school at this time? You could pool your questions and then vote as a staff for which one you would like to discuss. Even if you just see the range of questions and what they might have in common, or what the variety of questions, that will be informative for you as a staff and a leadership team to consider, okay, this is something we need to address. So if there was something that was not hard work, that won't take you long, but can have a huge impact for the direction of the school, I would get my colleagues to create a question from this question, vote on which ones you'd really like to discuss, and see where that takes you. And then you're collaboratively empowering the school using the power of questioning yourselves. Folks, may I remind you, there are some resources for you to use that you can download from the ESARP website. There's metacognitive questions. There's a range of questions that you can use on a daily basis as a teacher. And there are 10 recommendations for all sorts of stimuli and games and ideas and activities and websites that you can use to follow this session up. Anyway, what an enormous pleasure to share this short time with you. I do wish I could be there with you in person, and we'll cross fingers for that happening soon. But Silvana, can I just go back to you? I'll stop sharing screen, and I don't know if we have a moment or two for any questions.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. One is being written at this very moment, but there is a very tricky one. And the tricky one is about Goldilocks' story. And they say, as when the answer and the question is referring to the text, the question is, what was Goldilocks looking for? Is that answer really in the book? That's a question from the audience.
Oh, you know, I'd have to reread it to answer that accurately. I had the impression she was looking for food and shelter, but that may well be wrong. So I'm open to being corrected. Nice bit of research.
Another question is as regards how we could adapt questioning to kinder level.
Very good question, and I completely acknowledge I haven't had time to do that. Let me give you one practical technique or idea that I use with that very early years kind of stage. It's an anecdote. I went into the class and I was wearing my pajamas and my dressing gown, and my hair was all over the place. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry I'm late, but I woke up early this morning. There was a very soft knock at the door, and I opened the front door, and there's this tiny little teddy bear with a rucksack on his back." And then he fell unconscious, and I brought him in, and we've got to find out who he was. So I get the kids to open the rucksack, and there's kind of mysterious objects in there, like a magnifying glass and a map and other bits and bobs. And the rule is they can only ask questions. So in other words, what we're doing here is creating a mystery. So it's to take in a mystery situation, and it's to encourage them to question the mystery. So it could be anything. It could be looking at a beautiful insect in a jar. It could be watching a cartoon on YouTube. But the rule is that you can only ask questions, and all questions are invited. And if you want, I would start with perhaps helping them with question stems or starters, as they're called. So not just, you've got how, why, when, should, ought, I wonder if, is it possible that. Sometimes they need the language and the vocabulary and the framing, and just to practice that. So mystery situations and getting them to interrogate them, to wonder about them out loud. And you could model that. That's a very key way with kindergarten, is to model the phrasing and model being curious. There's a lot of other techniques, but that is, I hope, is one practical way forward.
I have now the WhatsApp loaded with questions that I will share with you by email, but I'm going to bring the last one. It is very difficult to have teachers change this attitude that learning is checked through asking questions and children always answering. What suggestions would you give head teachers to help their staff develop this as a teaching method in class?
First of all, I turn to the evidence and the research on questioning as something that improves pupil achievement. So look at the data, look at the evidence, that when we're getting them to question, we're actually getting them to improve the quality of their answers. So the quality of answer and the quality of, or the power of questioning are inseparable, in fact. If we want them to take them beyond just knowing into the realm of understanding, you need to use questioning. Otherwise, we're just getting them to take in facts, remember them, and express them. Now, that for me is not actual learning. It's when they interrogate the information. They ask questions about, does this connect with other things? Is this correct? Can I challenge this? What's the opposite of this? That is when you deepen the quality of learning. So as head teachers, I would make the argument that actually, if you improve the power of questioning, you're going to have far more fun in the classroom as the teacher. You're going to unlock that curiosity, but you're also going to have a direct impact on the quality of answers as well.
Well, I will send you by email the rest of the questions.
Oh, I'd love to see them.
I would like also, I forgot in the introduction to thank Cambridge Assessment International Education, who are the ones that by courtesy bring Will Ord to our conference. So thank you very much to our main sponsor. Will, as usual, I knew this was going to happen, that we wouldn't have enough time to listen to you because you always trigger wonderful questions. I promise I will share with you all these questions by email. And I want to thank you for joining us this morning in Argentina, afternoon in UK. And it's, as usual, a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you.
Silvana, that's so generous. And I wish all the delegates, all colleagues and friends there have a wonderful conference. I'm sure, I mean, it's been so interesting so far. I wish you all well, and hopefully we'll see each other in person with dancing in the future.
I know. Thank you so much. And we've got 10 more minutes to visit the exhibit hall. And in 10 minutes, we are going to return to meet Margarita Hughes, Nature and Art. See you in a few minutes.